Kia ora. Te Kooti was one of New Zealand's most enigmatic characters. He started a new religion, pursued a bloody and vicious war, and finally retired in Ohiwa as a man of peace. His story began with the East Cape Wars. Te Kooti was born in Turanga, modern-day Gisborne, on the East Cape of New Zealand. Until the mid-1860s, the East Cape was an independent Māori district where few settlers had ventured. Local iwi were defiantly independent of both Kingitanga and the Crown. However, the arrival of Paemariuri missionaries in 1865 changed that forever. Karl Volkner was the missionary in Opotiki at that time. Following the land wars in 1861, he had been providing information to the government about the activities of local Māori. On being discovered, he was hanged on a willow tree before his head was cut off in his church, where his blood was drunk from the church chalice. Colonial troops, reinforced with local Māori, marched on Opotiki to avenge his death. Many villages were attacked and destroyed, along with their livestock and crops. No attempt was made to determine who was guilty of the murder. It was sufficient that they lived in the district. Other prisoners were seized and subsequently convicted of Volkner's murder without any evidence being presented. 448,000 acres of land were confiscated in the Eastern Bay of Plenty. News of Volkner's killing soon reached Turanga in modern-day Gisborne, which was followed soon after by the arrival of the Paemariuri party. While many Turanga Māori enthusiastically converted to the new religion, they were also quick to reassure the settlers living there that they were in no danger. In April 1865, George Grey issued a proclamation condemning Paemariuri as a dangerous sect, calling for it to be suppressed by whatever means possible. Now, Paemariuri was not universally accepted by local Māori at Turanga, and this resulted in some internal fighting, which was greatly inflamed when the government provided guns and supplies for the Māori fighting against the new religion. Then the Hawke's Bay military settlers and forest rangers, led by Donald Maclean, arrived in Turanga and issued an ultimatum to the local iwi to surrender. Local Māori did not want to fight. They had not rebelled, and the Paemariuri fugitives living with them had already fled. But Maclean wanted to crush the independence of Turanga Māori and was not interested in a peaceful settlement. The defeat that followed was devastating. Turanga Māori was subjected to 10 years of military occupation. Much of their land was confiscated, and many of them were exiled, resulting in poverty and a dramatic decrease in their population. Many more were killed as far south as Napier, with more land being confiscated and many of the prisoners being exiled. There was more than a passing similarity with the Māori concept of utu, as expressed during the Musket Wars. The British might claim to be civilised, but they reacted with bloody violence when responding to provocation. Following the surrender, many of the Turanga Māori were imprisoned on the Chatham Islands, while the government formalised the confiscation of their land. Te Kooti had grown up in Turanga, and he initially supported the government. However, he was seen as a troublemaker by the settlers in Turanga, and he was eventually arrested and imprisoned on the Chathams as well. Conditions on the island were horrific, and Te Kooti became ill and began to have hallucinations and visions. On recovering, he started a new religion he called Ringatū, drawing on the Old and New Testaments. Like Paemariuri, he identified Māori as the lost tribes of Israel, who would soon have their land returned to them. This was readily accepted by the other prisoners, and with Te Kooti as their leader, they managed to escape from the island by overpowering the crew of a visiting ship and forcing them to sail back to the mainland. On the 10th of July 1868, they arrived just south of Young Nick's Head on the East Cape. Now Reginald Beggs commanded the militia at Turanga, and he stationed his men to block Te Kooti from escaping inland. Te Kooti responded by attacking their camp on the 20th of July, killing 2 men and wounding another 10, and capturing their horses, food, guns and ammunition. On hearing this, George Whitmore rushed over from his campaign against Te Kawaru in southern Taranaki to take command. On the 8th of August, Te Kooti outsmarted Whitmore's 120 men in a carefully prepared ambush, killing 5 men and wounding 6 others. Blocked from travelling inland because both Tuhoi and King Tawhio refused to allow him access, Te Kooti decided to return and reclaim Turanga. In the early hours of the 10th of November 1868, Te Kooti and a select group of warriors attacked the settlement of Matawhero, just west of Gisborne, killing Reginald Beggs, including his wife and infant son. By dawn, 30 Pākehā were dead or dying, and most of the settlement had been burned down. Te Kooti also took vengeance on any Māori who had crossed him, killing at least 22, including their wives and children. The backlash from Pākehā and Māori was inevitable. Te Kooti retreated inland and occupied the old hilltop pā at Ngā Tapa. By then, Whitmore had 700 men who were supported by Pūpapa Māori. He surrounded the pā and cut off the water supply, but the northern side was unguarded, as it was thought to be too steep for escape. However, Te Kooti and most of his men used flax ladders to climb down, leaving only a few women, children, and the badly wounded behind. In the pursuit that followed, around 100 of Te Kooti's followers were killed, with a further 140 being taken prisoner. Most of the prisoners were stripped naked, lined up along a cliff, and shot without trial. It was later discovered that most of them were prisoners that Te Kooti had taken, and they would have been innocent. The soldiers' response to Te Kooti was a reaction to the harsh brutality of his war party. Gilbert Mayer recorded an example of this on a more personal level when Te Kooti sent his lieutenant, Turanga Hiroa, to sack the mill house near Whakatane. His orders were that all were to be killed. The mill house contained the miller and his wife, Iri Hapeti, and her sister Monica. All were killed except the 2 women. In Mayer's words, and I quote, "The 2 women were about to suffer the same fate when Turanga Hiroa, struck by their beauty, dared to disobey Te Kooti's positive order that none were to be spared. He saved them and took them to his own tent. Te Kooti was exceedingly wroth, declaring that all 3 should die. But Iri Hapeti, who was distantly related to Te Kooti, pleaded for her captor, so his life was spared on the express condition that he make Iri Hapeti his wife, and with his own hand slay his innocent sister-in-law-to-be." As Turanga Hiroa approached to carry out Te Kooti's sentence, twisting the thong of his hatchet around his wrist, he called out, "Stand up, Monica." She flung her arms around her weeping sister, asking, "Will the suffering be long?" Petty answered, "No, it will be quite brief." The younger sister then exclaimed, "Hold you my hands that I may have courage." She did so, turning her face away, while the vengeful blow was struck. End of quote. Gilbert Mayer received this account when he met Iri Hapeti many years later. He described this as the most pathetic incident of the Maori Wars within my memory. Te Kooti then sacked the settlement at Whakatane before he was pursued by a small Te Aroha force led by Gilbert Mair. Fresh with reinforcements from these raids, Te Kooti was given sanctuary by Tūhoe in the Urewera region, where his Ringatū faith had found many converts. Tūhoe was to pay a very heavy price for this when they were invaded by General Whitmore in May 1869. Entire settlements were destroyed as punishment for supporting Te Kooti. These raids continued for the next 2 years, and Tūhoe were ultimately starved into submission. Following Whitmore's invasion, Te Kooti left Te Urewera to build a defensive pa at Te Poreri, just south of Turanga. On the 4th of October 1869, a combined force of 540 British and Maori troops successfully stormed the pa, killing 37 of the 200 defenders, leaving Te Kooti to escape through the dense bush and to finally make his way back to Te Urewera, where there were enough supporters to protect him. In February 1870, Donald Maclean established the No. 1 and No. 2 Aroha flying columns, led by Captains Gilbert Mair and George Priest. They proved to be more effective and much cheaper than using government soldiers. Over the next 2 years, they crisscrossed the inhospitable Ureweras in summer and winter, gradually depleting Te Kooti's resources, but never succeeding in capturing their elusive quarry. This campaign was rigorous in the extreme. They had to climb up and down cliff faces, wade through freezing rivers. They would camp without the warmth of a fire because that might give away their position. This was some of the most rugged country in New Zealand and a challenge for both the pursuers and the pursued. Mair's Aroha flying column finally defeated Te Kooti in February 1870, and this had the effect of undermining Te Kooti's mana with his Tūhoe supporters, who then began to help the two Aroha flying columns to track down Te Kooti. By December 1871, a small group of Aroha warriors found a recently abandoned campsite just south of Lake Waikaremoana. Across the steep gorge they could see around 20 men scrambling up the cliff face. They fired on them, but without success. One of the men was Te Kooti, and these were the last shots fired in the New Zealand Wars. In May 1872, Te Kooti was finally offered sanctuary by King Tawhio to live in the King Country. A year later, Te Kooti returned to Te Kooti, where he spent the next decade. He was finally pardoned in 1883 under the 1882 Amnesty Act. The following year, Te Kooti heard that Gilbert Mair was staying at a hotel in Matata, and he rode there on horseback with 30 of his warriors to honour his old adversary by placing a rare cloak over his shoulders. Mair responded by sending him a bottle of rum at Te Kooti's request. Te Kooti spent his last days in Ohiwa Harbour, just south of Whakatane, urging his followers to hold fast to the ways of peace, the law and the gospel. His Ringatū faith is still being practiced today. Now, I have summarised our turbulent shared history starting from the arrival of the missionaries in 1813 to the conclusion of the land wars following their genesis in Taranaki. It has been only the briefest of summaries, but I hope it is sufficient to provide a more accurate foundation for understanding the issues that are causing so much polarisation today. The following years would see Māori become a minority in their own country. More and more land would be lost, their culture would be undermined, and the promised benefits of colonisation would be very slow in coming. Today there has been a renaissance of Māori language and culture. Following treating settlements, some iwi are prospering, and to marriage is blending our different races together And many Māori have integrated into this modern environment and are enjoying prosperous lives. But there are also many who have been left out, and racial tensions are growing, driven by polarising agendas presented in our media, education systems, and by our political parties. I'm not offering solutions, but if we can start with a more solid foundation based on our shared history, we can hopefully work together to find a better path forward for everyone. Ngā mihi.